Okay, so you can think of depression in many ways. It's going to manifest differently in the brain depending on an individual's brain, how it's organized. One of the failings of the scientific literature is to look for commonalities for a condition. How does depression manifest in the brain in all brains, all individuals who are depressed? And you'll get a very small subset of what, and it may not even be that useful. And one of the great things about doing DNT is we use a brain map from the individual, so it's all personalized. We know how your brain is responding to the problems and the challenges that it's faced with. Um, Generally, think of depression as a compromised volition. You lose the desire to act or the ability to implement any your action. It's like if you think of an accelerator brake, you're always hitting the brake, never hitting the accelerator. Um, Braking too often. And not expanding is a way to think about it. And there's many parts. We're looking at the front of the head here, and we don't want those yellow areas. And there's many ways depression can manifest. In fact, there's multiple ways in a single individual it can express. And one of the ways is 38R over here on the right here, this box right here, deals with one's self-narrative, one's autobiography. And when you see it's yellow, sometimes it can be a strength, but most of the time, it's a problem. It means that the person is not really developing a good sense of one's own story, one's self-narrative, for whatever reason. Sometimes it means the amygdala, and that side is usually the more what I call the rage amygdala, the reactive amygdala, is kicking in too often. So you often see anger and frustration in there. Area 9 deals with what I said, evaluating the value of stimulus and fairness. Social fairness is finalized there. And it's the paternal hub, and poor coordination will mean sometimes the inability to implement an action. Same with Broca. Broca is how you plan and sequence. It's involved in planning and sequencing, and you could be this individual's compromised in 3 parts. Part of to characterize the depression, where some individual may have only one of those parts messed up. That's why you do a brain map. Find out what's going on. Now, once we got the brain map, we do what's called default network training. Now, you're looking at a single screen version. The one that is actually used in our office is where the video that's getting bigger and smaller, that whole unit, that whole screen is on another monitor, and the clinician has more controls. But what the clinician is doing is altering what form of training is going on. Now, the person has electrodes on their head, a few, not that many, but depending on what those electrodes are over, which networks we want to work on for that session. And it will alter the screen size, and the volume will drop whenever that network's not doing the activity we want. If it's being over coordinated or under coordinated, underactivated or overactivated, and we can see it using our controls here. And we learned out years ago that the volume manipulation is the better reinforcer. This whole thing is in the field of what's called operant conditioning, where we are training, we're rewarding the habits we want, so those habits will repeat, and we're just making those the brain habits. Okay, so some of the neuromarkers we've seen. For years, I would say when someone talked about depression, I would say, well, there's like at least 5 different types of depression, at least based on what we see in the brain. One of the ones is the singlets are in charge. The singlets is this yellow area on the top right here. And you can see that this is a, you have the thalamus and other sections of the subcortex here that you can call part of the limbic system, but this is the cingulate here. And the cingulates are the area that's mature, kind of running the show right before we really are interacting with our peers. Around first grade, probably from age 4 to 7, the cingulates are in charge. And if you know the 4 or the 7 in terms of EEG, that happens to be the theta range. So we see that can be caused. It can also be associated with anxiety, even psychoses when you have the cingulates in charge. Area 9 up in the front is often involved in depression. Area 38R, we often see people have low self-esteem. We can see low self-esteem in the way it's finalized, or one of the most important aspects of self-esteem is finalized in how we move around the world, move around our space, and that's finalized in area 6, the supplemental motor cortex. We'll often sometimes see harmonics in an individual, meaning that they They've reduced agency. In essence, they're ascribing too much agency to others, to the outside world. And often we'll see the posterior cingulate will be impaired in some ways or underconnected. And because depression starts with a sense of self-nurturing, and that's where that area, that function starts in the posterior cingulate. Okay, so a lot of individuals for hundreds of years have been looking at how to explain the behaviors of mental illness based on what shows in one's behavior, what we call the output here, if we're looking at this model here of neural networks. Well, we all know in these years of artificial intelligence coming in, the power of neural networks. Well, the first neural network is the one inside your skull. And in a way, we're looking at the same, we use a neural network in essence to understand what's going on and how to improve or fix the problems. We don't work on the output directly, we work on the brain region that is serving those outputs. And so if we fix how these respond, mature them up, as I like to say, we can remove these bad habits, these conditions. For instance, one example is like for post-traumatic stress disorder, we people see with the fMRI that this is the default network. Again, this is the PCC, posterior cingulate cortex, coordinated with the wings, the parietal wings, and the up in the front, this parietal wings, and this is the area 9, largely in the front, the medial prefrontal cortex. And when someone has PTSD, they show a reduction of the coordination. In essence, this lack of expansion going on between the PCC, this lack of coordination with it in its other areas. Well, we see the same thing in EEG, or similar thing in EEG. Okay, so quickly, how to think about EEG. We look at these classical bands, and these are one of the classical or conventional bands. They've been around for a long time. They've been successful in describing people's behavior or being associated with people's behavior. We have the delta activity from 0 to 4 hertz, and we see this here. Pink in this map is excessive. Blue is a deficit. This is an example of someone who has excessive delta. Delta is decortication, in essence, the lack of the sensory system processing information. So like being in your head without letting the sensory world constrain it. Then we have the theta activity, the next step up from 4 to 7. Sometimes people have it from 4 to 8. And there's been it's the frequency that much of the subcortex uses for information transfer. It's related to what's going on in the state of like the hippocampus, hypothalamus, the more primitive parts of our brain. Well, we can see theta also in the neocortex, and we can see how much it passes through a neocortical area. Is it the subcortical rhythm coming through, or is it neocortical rhythm? If subcortical, we're in trouble if we see it in our brain maps using the EEG, because that means the neocortex is acting like transparent water. It's not repurposing the subcortical impulses, and it's just letting them pass right through. And okay, so and we worry about, we have a couple forms of theta. We have theta that is this primitive reptilian system theta, and then we have the more advanced theta. And we also have something called the singular theta, which is the problem-solving theta. And then we get up to the after theta, we hit the alpha range. Alpha range, I think of it's a group-minded state, comes from alpha. It's how we interact, how we perceive the world. It's our resting state, in essence, where it's very low blood flow into the neocortex. And after that, we get into higher ranges. After alpha is the beta range, and those are we will talk about in terms of harmonics, and we have some coming up. So how do we see all these rhythms? We record 19 electrodes, using 19 electrodes, record brain activity during the resting states, and from the resting states we can see someone's habits. It's the idling states. It's like listening to a car engine when it's not on when you're just having it parked and you're listening to it. Whatever habits it's doing when it's parked are surely going to show up when it's stressed through the challenges of driving. So in the same respect, we look at the resting states to figure out what are the habits going on in the person's brain that will manifest during the challenges that they face later on. To figure out what's going on in EEG, you got to compare someone to a goal group. There's no absolute perfect number you can be. You can't say, oh, that's the amount of microvolts we need to be. How would we know that? The only way you know that is kind of find a goal group. Well, in DNT, we use this very advanced very healthy goal group. A lot of brain mapping is done comparing people to this low level group. People came into the hospital for some reason and they got an EEG, and then they using that as your database. They're coming in for some problem and they're not healthy, and you're being trained to that healthy level. It makes no sense. DNT, you train people to this higher state, this much more younger brain state in essence. In fact, our average, the adult norm is age 29. So when we're training people above age 29, we're actually trying to de-age them. We're training them to this lower level of how the brain was, lower level connectivity in the areas we are working. Okay. So one of the ways we can see is if the how through the brain map, through the CEG, we get a measure of where the individual is in terms of how much they're letting the theta pass through, how much they're letting subcortical theta dominate their behavior, dominate their cognition. When we see orange, and that's very transparent, we get this opaqueness, and we want to find a balance point. That's the green color. So we don't want the reptile part of our brain controlling us. We want the more mammalian, more advanced human parts, the one that allows empathy and social functioning. Okay, so let's start with the first neuromarker. I've shown this before in a previous video. When you have the singlets being transparent, it's in the fMRI. This is hyperconnectivity going on in the between the singlets regions. We see it like this, and it's a marker that the singlets, in essence, are in charge. They're too much in charge of the person's functioning. They're not being modulated by the neocortex. And what we do with the DNT is we train yellow singulates and try to get them green. Now, this is an example of two maps we got from an individual, and because this is not government-sponsored research anymore, everyone's paying for this data for themselves. We don't usually have post maps. We only have pre's and mids of late. We used to have posts when we were sponsored by various things. But when the individual sponsoring, they don't need the post. They know how they feel, whatever. We do the brain map to help guide our neurotherapy. So we do one map right before we start training, and then after around 30 hours of training, after about 15 visits, we'll do another map just to know where should we dedicate the remaining 10 hours or so, 10 visits or so, depending on what's going on with them. So in this individual, I bet we did 2 more sessions. We thought we probably estimated, okay, it's going to take about 6 sessions to remove that orange, get to the green, and we probably did 6, and then actually did about 8. Everyone's a little bit different. Also, how much dosage anyone gets from a neurofeedback session can vary depending on how responsive they are to the training, to the operating conditioning. This is an individual, very orange, very severe. I had all kinds of problems going on, and after 20, this is actually only after 20 hours, or there's 20 sessions, that might be 40 hours. They're much better. In fact, blue singlets usually sometimes can even be a positive issue, so it's not a huge problem. You can also see the other areas normalized too. Look at, we want to get green. We don't want orange. Orange can sometimes be a strength, but most of the time it's going to ruin. It's not going to help your personal life. You're going to be overreactive, allowing the environment to interfere with your goals. Too relational. And we want to get to the green, but blue sometimes can be a strength as well, especially when it's like light blue. Deep blue, usually that's under connectivity. That's too severe. We like this light blue color or the green is a good point to get to. This is an individual you can see going from yellow to green. Now, the issue that often does happen is when people we solve one problem, and it's a little bit of whack-a-mole. Now, this person, something people get locked into, they want to be depressed almost. They don't want to be depressed, but they don't know anything different. And it's more of a whack-a-mole situation. And so we solve one area, and then we're hit with, okay, now we have a different problem to deal with, but we can adjust to it. And we'll start training the occipitals in this individual. All right, we'll be back in a bit to continue this saga.